Hello all. So in this video we will be continuing unit 1 of environmental science 1 AEC paper. Okay, so with this video we are done with the unit 1. Fine. So environmentalism history, a brief introduction. Where do our ideas about environment come from? It is from three. That is, first is utilitarian conservation. That means we know what the word term utility means. Utilize. So we are utilizing environment, right? Water, air, land, everything we are utilizing for our food, for our existence. We are utilizing everything in the environment. So utilitarian conservation seeks to protect useful resources, resources that are useful or that we are using for our living. Second, wilderness preservation aims to preserve wilderness for aesthetic, intellectual, or philosophical value. Third, modern environmental movements have formed to fight pollution, injustice, and poverty. Debates about human misuse of nature have a long history. Plato complained in the 4th century BCE that Greece once had been blessed with fertile soil and clothed with abundant forest of fine trees. After the trees were cut to build houses and ships, however, heavy rains washed the soil into the sea. We know how soil erosion happens, right? When there are, if we are having grass, the roots of grass, even the grass will hold a particular amount of soil, but when there are no roots, there is no plants, soil get washed with water. So here, when the trees were cut to build houses and ships, however, heavy rains washed the soil into the sea, leaving only a rock skeleton of a body wasted by disease. Springs and rivers dried up and farming became all but impossible. Many classical authors regarded Earth as a living being, vulnerable to aging, illness, and even mortality following the devastation of forest clearing, soil degradation, and other activities. Some of the earliest scientific studies of environmental degradation were carried out in the 18th century by French and British colonial administrators. So now further we'll be studying many activists, environmental activists, okay? So here Plato was not that environmental activist, but he had words on that, he had concerns on that. So the first person we studied is Plato. Next we are going to study like other people also, so not those names, okay? These administrators, so these French and British colonial administrators, some of whom were trained scientists, observed rapid soil loss and drying wells that resulted from intensive colonial production of sugar and other commodities. These early conservationists observed and understood the connection between deforestation, soil erosion, and local climate change. So they recognized that environmental stewardship was an economic necessity. Second is Stephen Hales, the pioneering British plant physiologist. Stephen Hales, for instance, suggested that conserving green plants preserved rainfall. His ideas were put into practice in 1764 on the Caribbean island of Tobago, where about 20% of the land was marked as reserved in wood for rains. Stephen Hales, conserving green plants preserved rainfall. Suggestion put forward by Stephen Hales, okay? And as a result, in Caribbean island of Tobago, 20% of the land was marked as reserved in wood for rains. Next, Pierre Poivre, an early French governor of Mauritius, an island in the Indian Ocean, was appalled at the environmental and social devastation caused by destruction of wildlife such as flightless dodo and felling of ebony forests on the island by early European settlers. In 1769, Poiver declared that 1/4 of the island was to be preserved in forest, particularly on steep mountain slopes and along waterways. Mauritius remains a model for balancing nature and human needs. Its forest reserves shelter a large percentage of its original flora and fauna, flower and animal, that most other human occupied islands. Next, current ideas have followed industrialization. We can divide conservation history and environmental activism into 4 distinct stages. First is pragmatic resources. Second, moral and aesthetic nature preservation. Third, a growing concern about health and ecological damage caused by pollution. Fourth, global environmental citizenship. So, stage 1, resource based inspired pragmatic utilitarian conservation. Many historians consider the publication of Man and Nature in 1864 by geographer George Perkins Marsh as the wellspring of environmental protection in North America. Okay, not these names. George Perkins Marsh. Man and Nature publication, year 1864. This is really important because for MCQs you may have such questions from all these, okay, for MCQs. So pragmatic means dealing with things sensibly and realistically in a way that it is based on practical rather than theoretical considerations. Okay, so practically how we can conserve the resources which are useful, utilitarian conservation. So Perkins read widely in the classics, including Plato, and personally observed the damage caused by the excessive grazing by goats and sheep and by the deforestation of steep hillsides. Alarmed by the wanton destruction and profligate waste of resources still occurring on the American frontier in his lifetime, he warned of its ecological consequences. Largely as a result of his book, national forest reserves were established in the US in 1873 to protect dwindling timber supplies at endangered watershed. Okay, so Man and Nature publication in 1864 by George Perkins Marsh, and he is in his works led to the establishment of national forest reserves in 1873 in US. Okay, for what? Protecting dwindling timber supplies and endangered watershed. Among those influenced by Marsh's warnings were President Theodore Roosevelt and his chief conservation advisor Gifford Pinchot. In 1905, Roosevelt moved the Forest Service out of the corruption-filled Interior Department into the Department of Agriculture. Pinchot, who was the first native-born professional forester in North America, became the founding head of this new agency. He put resource management on an honest, rational, and scientific basis for the first time in our history. Together with naturalists and activists such as John Muir, William Brewster, and George Bird Grinnell, Roosevelt and Pinchot established the framework of America's National Forest Park and Wildlife Refuge system, passed game protection laws, and tried to stop some of the most flagrant abuses of the public domain. The basis of Roosevelt's and Pinchot's policies was pragmatic utilitarian conservation. They argued that the forest should be saved, not because they are beautiful or because they shelter wild creatures of the wilderness, but only to provide homes and jobs for people. We need to preserve, we need to conserve forest, we need to protect forest, we need to protect nature because it provides home and jobs for people, not because of the reason that it is beautiful or aesthetic. Okay, this is what utilitarian conservation means. Resources should be used for the greatest good, for the greatest number of the longest time. So resources should be used for the greatest good, for the greatest number, for the longest time. The first principle of conservation is development and the use of the natural resources now existing on this continent for the benefit of the people who live here now. There may be just as much waste in neglecting the development and use of certain natural resources as there is in their destruction. Second stage is ethical and aesthetic concerns inspired the preservation movement. John Muir was a geologist, author, and first president of the Sierra Club. He strenuously opposed Pinchot's utilitarian approach. Matlab, protecting nature only because of the reason that it provides home and food for humans, not because of the reason that it is aesthetic or beautiful. That is utilitarian approach, and John Muir opposed it. Muir argued that nature deserves to exist for its own sake, regardless of its usefulness to us. Aesthetic and spiritual values formed the core of his philosophy of nature protection. This outlook has been called biocentric preservation because it emphasizes the fundamental right of other organisms to exist and to pursue their own interest. Muir wrote, "The world we are told was made for man," a presumption that is totally unsupported by the facts. Nature's object in making animals and plants might possibly be first of all the happiness of each one of them. Why should man to value himself as more than an infinitely small unit of the one great unit of creation? Muir, who was an early explorer and interpreter of the Sierra Nevada mountains in California, fought long and hard for the establishment of Yosemite and Kings Canyon national parks. The National Park Service, established in 1916, was first headed by Muir's disciple Stephen Mather and has always been oriented toward preservation of nature in its purest state. It has often been at odds with Pinchot's utilitarian forest service. Personally, I am with John Muir, okay? Because nature deserves to exist for its own sake, regardless of its usefulness to us. It's Mother Nature, right? I personally said my opinion, okay? In 1935, pioneering wildlife ecologist Aldo Leopold bought a small, worn-out farm in central Wisconsin, a dilapidated chicken shack. The only remaining building was remodeled into rustic cabin. Okay. Working together with his children, Leopold planted thousands of trees in a practical experiment in restoring the health and beauty of the land. Leopold argued for stewardship of the land. He wrote of the land ethic by which we should care for the land because it's the right thing to do as well as the smart thing. Conservation, he wrote, is the positive exercise to skill and insight, not merely a negative exercise of abstinence or caution. The shack became a writing refugee and became the main focus of a Sand County Almanac, a much beloved collection of essays. A Sand County Almanac, okay, about our relation with nature. Who wrote it? Aldo Leopold. A Sand County Almanac. In it, Leopold wrote, "We abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect." Stage 3. Rising pollution levels led to the modern environmental movement. The undesirable effects of pollution probably have been recognized at least as long as those of forest destruction. In 1273, King Edward I of England threatened to hang anyone burning coal in London because of the acrid smoke it produced. In 1661, the English diarist John Evelyn complained about the noxious air pollution caused by coal fires and factories and suggested that sweet-smelling trees be planted to purify city air. Increasingly dangerous smoke attacks in Britain led to 1880 to the formation of a national fog and smoke committee to combat this problem. The tremendous industrial expansion during and after the Second World War added a new set of concerns to the environmental agenda. Silent Spring, written by Rachel Carson. Silent Spring, written by Rachel Carson, and published in 1962, awakened the public to the threats of pollution and toxic chemicals to humans as well as other species. The movement she engendered might be called environmentalism because its concerns are extended to include both environmental resources and pollution. Like many environmentalists, Carson was specially concerned with the ways pollution endangered human health. Other pioneers of this movement were activist David Brower, who fought to protect public lands from industrial destruction, and biologist Barry Commoner. Brower, while executive director of the Sierra Club, Friends of the Earth, and the Earth Island Institute, introduced many of the techniques of modern environmentalism, including litigation, intervention in regulatory hearings, book and calendar publishing, and using mass media for publicity campaigns. Like Rachel Carson, Barry Commoner was principally interested in environmental health, an issue that is especially urgent for low-income, minority, and inner-city residents. Trained as a molecular biologist, Commoner protested the health impacts of nuclear testing and of industrial pollution, hazards revealed by his work as a biologist. Many of today's efforts to curb climate change or reduce biodiversity losses are led by scientists who raise the alarm about environmental problems. Stage 4. Environmental quality is tied to social progress. Many people today believe that the roots of the environmental movement are elitist, promoting the interest of the wealthy minority who can afford to vacation in wilderness, resorts and nature, right? In fact, most environmental leaders have seen social justice. I'm really sorry for the mistake. In fact, most environmental leaders have seen social justice and environmental equity as closely linked. Gifford Pinchot, Teddy Roosevelt, and John Muir all strove to keep land and resources accessible to everyone at a time when public lands, forests, and waterways were increasingly controlled by industrial interest, especially railroad, mining, and logging companies. The idea of national parks, one of our principal strategies for nature conservation, is to provide public access to natural beauty and outdoor. Aldo Leopold, a founder of the Wilderness Society, promoted ideas of land stewardship among farmers, fishers, and hunters. Robert Marshall, also a founder of the Wilderness Society, campaigned all his life for social and economic justice for low income groups. Many environmental leaders grew up in working class families, so their sympathy with social causes is not surprising. Increasingly, environmental activists are linking environmental quality and social progress on a global scale. Barry Commoner, for example, emphasized that uneven poverty and wealth are a root cause of environmental health risk of pollution and of population growth. One of the core concepts of modern environmental thought is sustainable development, often defined as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. In other words, we should be able to improve conditions for the world's poorest populations without deteriorating the environment. This definition was given in 1987 report of the World Commission on Environment and Development, Our Common Future. The report is often called the Brundtland Report after the chair of the commission, Norwegian Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland. We studied it in the beginning of the unit. The Brundtland Report led to the pivotal 1992 Earth Summit, a UN meeting held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The Rio meeting was a pivotal event because it brought together many diverse groups, environmentalists and politicians from wealthy countries, indigenous people and workers struggling for rights and land, and government representatives from developing countries altogether, and became more aware of their common needs. The Rio meeting is largely credited with spreading the idea of sustainable development. Some of today's leading environmental thinkers come from developing nations where poverty and environmental degradation plague hundreds of millions of people. Dr. Wangari Maathai of Kenya was a notable example. In 1977, Dr. Maathai founded the Green Belt movement in her native Kenya as a way of both organizing poor rural women and restoring their environment. Beginning at a small local scale, this organization has grown to more than 600 grassroots network across Kenya. They have planted more than 30 million trees while mobilizing communities for the self-determination, justice, equity, poverty reduction, and environmental conservation. Dr. Maathai was elected to the Kenyan parliament and served as Assistant Minister for Environment and Natural Resources. Her leadership helped bring democracy and good government to her country. In 2004, she received the Nobel Peace Prize for her work, the first time a Nobel has been awarded for environmental action. In her acceptance speech, she said, "Working together, we have proven that sustainable development is possible, that reforestation of degraded land is possible, and that exemplary governance is possible when ordinary citizens are informed, sensitized, mobilized, and involved in direct action for the environment." Under the leadership of a number of other brilliant and dedicated activists and scientists, the environmental agenda was expanded in the 1960s and 1970s to include issues such as human population growth, atomic weapons testing and atomic power, fossil fuel extraction and use, recycling, air and water pollution, wilderness protection. Environmentalism has become well established on the public agenda since the first National Earth Day in 1970. You saw this photograph, right? Photographs of Earth from space provide a powerful icon for the fourth wave of ecological concern, that is global environmentalism. These photos remind us how small, fragile, beautiful and rare our home planet is. We all share a common environment at this global scale. As our attention shifts from questions of preserving particular landscapes or preventing pollution of a specific watershed or airshed, we begin to worry about the life support systems of the whole planet. A growing number of Chinese activists are part of this global environmental movement. In 2006, Yu Xiaogang, I'm not sure if this is pronounced in this way itself, just refer, was awarded the Goldman Prize, the world's top honor for environmental protection. Yu was recognized for his work on Yunnan's Lashi Lake, where he brought together residents, government officials, and entrepreneurs to protect wetlands, restore fisheries, and improve water quality. He also worked on sustainable development programs such as women's schools and microcredit loans. His leadership was instrumental in stopping plans for 13 dams on Nu River, known as the Salween in Thailand and Burma. Another Goldman Prize winner is Dai King, who was jailed for her book that revealed the social and environmental cost of the Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze River. Now, these are some of the environmentally significant days, which is really important for the MCQs, okay, and match the following, fill in the blanks and all these. World Wetlands Day, February 2, marking the date of the adoption of Convention on Wetlands in 2nd February 1972. Next is World Forest Day, March 21. Resolution of UN General Assembly on November 28, 2012. The first time on 21st March 2030. World Water Day, March 22. UN Observance Day in 1993. Highlight the importance of fresh water. World Meteorological Day, 23rd of March, with the establishment of World Meteorological Organization in 1950. Earth Day, April 22. First celebration in 1970 for the environmental protection. International Day for Biological Diversity. 22nd May. UN sanctioned International Day for the Promotion of Biodiversity issue in Rio Earth Summit 1992 22nd May. Anti-Tobacco Day 31st May, started by WHO World Health Organization from 1987 to prevent all forms of tobacco consumption around the globe. World Environment Day June 5th, started by UN Assembly after Stockholm Conference in 1972 as principal vehicle for encouraging awareness and action for the protection of our environment. World Ocean Day 8th June. It has been started celebrating in 1992 by Canada's International Centre for Ocean Development and Ocean Institute of Canada at Earth Summit UN Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. World Population Day 11th July. The event was established by Governing Council of the UNDP in 1989 to raise awareness of global population issues. World Ozone Day, September 16th, stated celebrating in 1994 by UN General Assembly for preservation of the ozone layer. Green Consumer Day, September 28th, started by various organizations for sustainable consumer behavior. Wildlife Week, October 1st to 7th. India started celebrating a week to conserve the animal from 2013. This was started.